Welcome to Chewing the Crust with me, the Piety Man. This is a podcast about life's unexpected twists and turns. Life doesn't always go as planned, but obstacles and change don't have to define us. In this podcast, I talk to incredible guests who have faced major life pivots and found a way forward, proving that success and happiness are always within reach. If you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you never miss an episode. And if you prefer to listen on the go, subscribe to your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So now, let's dive in and discover how to turn life's challenges into opportunities. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Chewing the Crust with me, the Piety Man. Today's guest has a story you'll want to understand. From Leeds to the courtroom, the journey's been grand. A barrister now, but once stacking shelves by hand, adopted, determined, and fighting for change, championing justice and breaking the chains. From high-profile cases to history's lost pages, Glenn Parsons is here, so let's turn the pages. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning, Mark, and what a fabulous introduction. You must have put some work into that.
Well, I try my best. It's one of my few, I wouldn't even say talents, but it's one of my few capabilities that I can throw something like that together.
Oh, very good indeed. Anything I will say, Mark, is that when I saw you with a pie eating man, I thought there may be some pies involved in this, but mine haven't arrived yet.
Well, very interestingly, the most important question that we do ask on this podcast is, what is your favourite pie filling?
Well, my savoury one would be the classic steak and ale pie. But I don't know about you, Mark, but I'm very particular. It's got to be a full pie, full base, and topping, not just a top.
Not like a Cheetah's pub pie.
No, that's not a pie, in my view. It's
Yeah,
just simply not a pie.
it's a stew with a lid.
Yes, exactly. I'm against that.
But you're the first person of the people that I've spoken to who has alluded to the fact that there is more than just a savoury pie. So you hinted there that you may have a preference for a sweet pie too.
Oh yeah. I mean, straight again, a man of simple tastes. Apple pie as well.
What about the crumble? Does the crumble fall into the pie territory? Or is that another Cheetah's pie?
Yeah, not a Cheetah's pie, not a pie. It's got to be fully encased, Mark, in the pastry. Otherwise, it just doesn't qualify, as far as I'm concerned.
My son lives down south and in London, and he's a chef, and he craves a good pie. When he comes up, one of the first things he does is go for a pie because you just can't get a good pie down south, it would seem.
No. As with fish and chips and a good pint of beer, it's all happening in the north.
We met very briefly a couple of years ago, and when I met you, you struck me as being a very interesting person, actually. And I was I was intrigued by you because I am a bit of a thinker. I'm a people, but I love people and I love people's stories. And you and I share a good friend, and I won't name that good friend because in my group of friends, he's known as Captain Chaos because he has a habit of throwing a hand grenade into any scenario and making things rather difficult. And the weekend that you and I met, we were supposed to be going away for a boys' weekend to a country lodge in the woods, and everybody pulled out apart from our shared friend. And he said, "Yeah, we can do that, but I've got to do this first. I'm coming to Filey to do this." And I was like, "What the hell have you got me involved with here?" But I've said his name. I'll bleep that out. When I did attend, I was really pleased to have attended, and it became something that I thought about a lot. And I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to at least discuss it with you on a platform that might maybe change one mind. So, but we'll come back to that. Glenn, so take us back to your early years. What was it like growing up?
Good place to start. As an overview, I was born 1967. Immediately went into the care system. My mother couldn't take care of me. And I was in an orphanage, as they were called then, just on the outskirts of Leeds. And then I was adopted by a white family. And so fast forward, here we are now, over 50, nearly 60 years. That, strange enough, that sort of thing wouldn't happen now.
No.
So social services would not allow somebody from an ethnic background ordinarily to go and be adopted by a white family. But that gave me a kind of unique perspective on issues of race and upbringing, because I was brought up in a very comfortable white middle-class family in a very nice suburb on the outskirts of Leeds. And of course, the people who would see me in that area, I was probably the only black person that they knew. But
Wow.
because they knew my family, there was no issue. I played with their kids. And it was a surprise to me later on as you grow up and start coming into Leeds on a weekend. Of course, this was then the late 70s, early 80s. Lots of racial issues in Leeds, in the football, on the football terraces, in the middle of the town centre, where the National Front would openly campaign.
Wow.
And it was a shock for me to experience it. I was a lot older then, experiencing racism and realising that even though I'd had a very pleasant, comfortable upbringing, once you go out on the streets of Leeds, you're another black person to racists and at that time to the police. And the other thing that struck me, and I remember about those days, is that lots of friends and family and neighbours, very, very supportive, and there was no issue of race where I was concerned. But then you would hear them talking about other people from ethnic minorities, and realising that actually just below the surface, there was always this sort of undercurrent, and it always, you realise, come from what they don't know, because it seemed to not even cross their mind that saying the sort of things within my hearing could upset me, or at those days people would say, well, you know, you're one of us, you know, we don't think of you as black, we don't see colour, all those sort of really quite idiotic sayings that people used to say in the 70s and 80s. So I suppose I've ridden that sort of tidal wave of changes in people's attitudes towards colour and terminology, most of it for the better, which has brought me to where I am now.
First thing that struck me there is 1967. I thought you were about the same age as me. You're clearly aging much better than I am. I cannot believe that you were born in 1967.
Oh, that's very kind of you. These lights, Mark, I tell you, they really work well. If the lighting rig up I've got here, you know, it's fantastic.
What an interesting sort of juxtaposition to find yourself in, and perhaps not really understand that it was a juxtaposition until you were old enough to look back and things snap into place. I mean, it must be really odd, that.
Yes, yeah. As I say, fine when I was at school. There were not many of the black faces at school, but there were some. It was just later on when you go out into wider society and realise how, you know, things like going to shops with my parents, no problem. But then when I started getting to town on my own, going into sports shop, for example, where as soon as I saw a black face, they either said, well, you're not coming in, or you've got to leave your bags at the door. Those sort of things. I was just absolutely staggered by that. I'd never experienced anything like that. And of course, the few black friends that I had were sort of saying, yeah, this is what it's like. And it was sort of weird coming to that much later on. I realised I was in a kind of false sense of security about issues of colour. And it was quite a startling awakening.
I mean, what a wonderful thing to do as well back in those days for your parents, your adopted parents, to take on a child of a different race. I mean, they will have known the issues that potentially would have occurred for you and for them. And I mean, that's not only a wonderful thing to do, because adoption is a wonderful thing to do, but you know, it's quite a brave thing to do, isn't it, back in those days?
Yeah. I mean, they were remarkable people. Sadly, neither of them with us any longer. And they had 3 daughters of their own.
Wow.
But my mum was a campaigner during the 1960s for women's rights, and she was campaigning for children who were in Vietnam to come over to this country. And there was a big campaign in the 1960s for that, given that it was felt that a lot of the problems that were there, as with now, were created by the West and by America going in and invading, etc.
Yeah.
And it was pointed out to her, well, actually, there are a lot of children in this country who need adoption. And of course, there's at the time, different times, Mark, times in the 1960s, it's easy to forget, where having a child out of wedlock was an enormous shame.
Yeah.
And there were what were called mother and baby units and mother and baby homes, where young girls who got pregnant would say to the word would go out across the family, she's gone to live with a relative abroad, but she'd be in a mother and baby unit having a child, and it would be kept away from the family and from the wider neighbours and things like that, and have the child, and then the child would be taken away, and that would happen both to
just heartbreaking. It doesn't even.
Yeah, it's very, very different times. It happened to white children as well as children of colour.
Interestingly, the first chap that I interviewed for this podcast, a chap called Steve Edney, he is a great guy, but they had a son, and a year into young Max's life, he fell and broke his leg. And then 6 weeks later, he did the same thing, and it turned out he had brittle bones. But at the time, they didn't know this. And he says that even today, children who, if you don't know the signs of brittle bones, and there are some specific signs that help you to establish that for doctors, children will be taken away and adopted. And once they're adopted, that's it. It's game over. And it can be of no fault to the parent whatsoever. And it's quite alarming that even nowadays, something like that still happens. It's just breathtaking.
Very frightening. I mean, my story has a happy end to it, in that I did eventually manage to trace my father and mother. Obviously, they've not seen each other for decades, but my father's no longer with us, but my mother is alive, and she'd gone to America after she felt she was being forced, really. She felt that she had no real chance in the late 60s of bringing up a child on her own, her being quite young herself. So she felt she had no choice, and then she went and restarted her life in America. Difficult for her when I did finally make contact with her, because nobody in her family, her husband, her other 3 children, knew anything about it. So
wow,
but that's a whole other story.
How did your adoptive parents then approach the subject of race with you? Was it? I mean, it sounds like your adopted mother was a force to be reckoned with. To be
She was.
frank,
She was, Valerie. She was. She really was. Well, I mean, they tried to prepare me that some people might take against you, or think that you're not as good as them because of your colour. And of course, when somebody's explaining that to you in a sort of abstract form, you can't really understand it.
no,
It's only when you experience it at first hand. I think the best lessons that they taught me, and what I try to teach my children, is to, if you attempt something and you're not successful, not to just fall back on the fact, oh, I didn't get that because I'm black, or people are racist against me, because they view that as an easy out. May be right, but the only way to overcome that is to try and make yourself even better than
it
any
must be
other
difficult
candidate.
though, to be repeatedly put against your peers, achieve the same level as them, and perhaps not have the same opportunities, despite being on an absolute level or even ahead of somebody. There's only so many punches you can take in the nose before you must at
Yeah.
least consider that.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose you've just got resilience is an important factor to keep going, and self-belief.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely what this podcast is about. It's to show people really that sometimes when things are dark and you're struggling, and you feel like you've explored lots of different avenues, that the light at the end of the tunnel can feel like it's always going to be an oncoming train, and
Mm.
I think you're living proof that you know the I always say there's no such thing as luck, but the harder you try, the luckier you get. And I think, you can't give up, can you? If it's your dreams
No,
and the things that you want to achieve.
no, absolutely. And I've sort of employed that uh, as a mantra throughout my life and what I've tried to achieve. And the main things I wanted to achieve was find my real birth parents, qualify as a barrister, and I've had my campaign, which I know we're going to come on to, for wider recognition of the contribution of people of colour to the history of this country.
So before we get to that, then you've touched on the barrister element. That's another story in itself. From you finished school, well, you can tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid I spent too much time playing football badly at school, and I think I was going to be spotted and have a football career. Nothing like that ever really materialised. And I got to the end of my school year, went into the sixth form for a while, and he had a couple of qualifications, and then went on again. For those who remember, what the YTS course,
Oh yeah.
Margaret Thatcher's youth training scheme, or Young, Thick and Stupid, as we used to call it. But we used to we went on that, and it was designed to give school leavers some work experience, and you were paid 25 quid a week to go work in a supermarket. And I did that for several years, actually, from being about 17 to my early 20s. But actually had good fun in the early days. You're earning a wage, or everybody working in safe ways, as it was, no longer exists now in this country. In the supermarket, it was all good fun. In those days, it shut on a Thursday afternoon and 6 o'clock on a Saturday. It was very different.
Wow. Yeah.
It was, but of course, as you approach your sort of early to mid 20s, I realised this wasn't the life I envisaged for myself, and I couldn't see any future in it whatsoever. And it only then really dawned on me the value of the true value of education is your qualifications.
Was there a point that something clicked? Did something happen, or did you see other people do something that made you think, hang on a minute, I'm stagnating?
Well, yes. I mean, the thing is about being at the supermarket was with lots of other people who working there part time who were students who were coming through, working there part time. Then they'd come back through the holidays when they went to university. Then
Yeah.
you see them shopping and driving the cars into the supermarket saying, oh, yeah, I've got this job now. And I was by then doing a management training course there. And you had, as part of it, it's a very small part of it, do the Railway Premises Office and Shops Act. You had to learn a little bit about that. Tiny part of the overall assessment. But when I started reading, I thought, actually, this is quite interesting, the law. I never thought about it at all. And then a chance conversation with somebody I was working with who told me that her husband had just done a degree part-time at night school. And if you're over 21, you could go there as a mature student. You didn't need any qualifications.
Wow.
So I realized that was actually my way out. That was a sort of real pivotal moment where I thought, actually, yeah, there's a way out of this for me. And then I started going to night school and did a law A-level. I probably shouldn't tell you this, Mark, but I always think I'm probably the least qualified lawyer. I've got two O-levels and an A-level, and that's it. But then I did go on to do my degree and study the bar course. But
But you
as a
say you
mature
didn't tell me
student,
that, but I think that's something to be really proud of, because it shows that qualifications aren't everything. You can be an
mm,
intelligent or a capable person. It's why I think, to some extent, our school system is flawed, because we teach people in the same way over and over again, and certain people just don't take to it. And perhaps you were an example of that. You wanted to play football, you wanted to do something differently. You certainly didn't come out of it with the full potential that you were capable of because of where you are now. So, I think that's something to be really proud of, that you weren't prepared to let that hold you back.
No, no, no. I think, I mean, my wife's got a theory now because my daughter, who's just turned 8, been very recently diagnosed with dyslexia. And of course, when I was at school, early 70s, the term just didn't exist.
No.
You were maybe special needs, you used to go and play on the creative table, things like that. And although I've always been a good reader, always from as a child a good reader, but terrible spelling, handwriting, and the things that my daughter was doing, doing all the 5s and the J's and the D's all the way the wrong way around. Which sometimes I often think now were when she was assessed, they said that there's classic signs. So I don't know whether there was a bit of that, and I just sort of tuned out. But I think that maybe played a part, but it never dampened my determination to try and succeed. So I took the leap. I went to night school, got a A-level, enrolled at Huddersfield University part-time, but as luck would have it, Mark, and there's always these little bits of luck, as you've said, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Absolutely right. Safeway is looking to make some redundancies. Just as I signed up for the part-time course, and I thought, actually, if I take my redundancy money and get a grant, and in those days you could still get a grant, I could just about eke through and go full-time. So I took that. It was a great bit of luck, took my redundancy pay and went full-time to Huddersfield University. Got my degree.
This was when? Is this in the 80s or the 90s?
90s. That was then 1995. So I was 27.
Right.
So quite.
So you had
old.
a good breadth of life as well behind you, and I always think that's a really important thing for a job like yours.
Absolutely. There's so many things that I took from my time at working at Safeways in the supermarket. I mean, getting on with other people, communicating to customers, hard work, not very well paid, and making sure you see it attached through. All those things, actually, I do think stood me in very good stead. And although the job I've got now is very rewarding, can be challenging, I never felt I've worked as hard as I ever did when I was at that supermarket, doing long shifts, stacking shelves, trying to overcome the boredom. So then I qualified, got called to the bar, and then of course very, very difficult to be taken on at barrister chambers because there just simply weren't any black barristers about that I could see. Certainly in the north of England, there were some in London.
So excuse my ignorance. You're qualified as a solicitor at this point. How do you get called to the bar then? What does that involve?
Solicitor route is a different strand. So once you've done your degree, you might want to go off and do the solicitor's course, or you go and do your study for your bar finals, as it was called then. So I went that way. I knew I wanted to be an advocate. So I went down to bar school at that time. There was one in London, got a scholarship. I was, again, I think very, very fortunate, the timing being everything. After Stephen Lawrenson, before Macpherson report, when all those issues of race that had been just under the surface were bubbling to the top, and phrase institutional racism.
So for once, it's possible that that your race actually benefited you in that scenario.
Absolutely, I think it did, without a shadow of a doubt. I was just in the right place at the right time. And whenever I meet any other people of colour who are senior at the bar, I always can predict that they were called between 1993 and 1999. I say, you were called in what I call the Macpherson Stephen Lawrence corridor, 93 to 99, when there were scholarships going, a bit like what happened with George Floyd, 20 odd years later.
Which is in itself hideous, really.
It is really, because those changes were made and it needed to be made. But then after the millennium, it all ebbed away again. And people became complacent. And then there was, I think, a very much outpouring of anger and upset when we realised 20 years on we'd not progressed anywhere near as far as we thought we did. But yeah, going back to that time, in the mid to late 90s, there were scholarships, and it was seen as a positive because the bar realised that there were no black practitioners. There were few Asian. I mean, they're still wrestling with the prospect of women being at the bar. And although there were women at the bar in reasonable numbers, the main complaint there was no scheme to retain them. Once they had children, a lot of them left. They were never really promoted to the bench. There were no women on the bench, and they didn't progress to become KCs or Queen's Counsels. It would have been then, to the higher echelons. So it was very much dominated, even in the 90s, by a white male overview.
As a white guy from working class background, but probably middle class now, just having grown up in a family where I grew up with, my dad didn't live with us, so I lived in a matriarchal family. So I never grew up with any sort of sexist beliefs or none of that. So that is very alien to me, that the fact that women are not being paid the same amount of money for men for the same job, even to this day. And the story that you're saying, I was brought up in Hull, and in Hull there was very little racial difference at all. You may well have seen that in your travels, but nowadays there is probably more. But I think that's a far more Eastern European mixture than there is in any other sort of people of colour. I think that can sometimes create racism, I think, and it probably does to some extent in some of these East Coast towns where there are very few people of colour. But for me, it just meant that I had no real comprehension of racism, or it just didn't compute with me. People are just people, and I never got it. So to think that we're having this conversation in 2025, 30 years on, and we're still not really much further forward. It's like a conversation that you would expect to see in the colonial times in America. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're still not moving forward at anywhere near the pace, and the bar now is the same. We've had a lot of initiatives recently, but I've seen that over the times that I've been at the bar, and some have come and gone.
So you're passionate about people from an ethnic minority entering the world of law. What is it that you've done to help people achieve that?
Well, when I started practicing in 1999, but I was called in 1999 and struggled to get pupillage and be taken on. Not just, and again, it's not just an issue of colour. It was because I did not have the qualifications. I'd been called, and I was legitimately a barrister, but I had 2 GCSEs and 1 A level.
So pupillage is finding somewhere to work.
Yes, it's an apprenticeship course for barristers. So you need to find a chambers that will take you on, and you'll be assigned a pupil supervisor, as they're called now, and they take you under their wing, and they basically train you up. And as I say, again, going back to what my parents told me, I did not think I was being excluded because of my colour. I think I felt I was being excluded also because I hadn't come the traditional route. I was a bit older, didn't have the reams of qualifications at GCSE and A level. I didn't have any contacts within the profession. So somebody suggested to me, well, there are some chambers which are almost exclusively people from ethnic minorities in London. And can you believe that those days they were called ghetto chambers?
Oh my
Those
God.
sort of chamber, and they were referred to as so they were regarded as a sort of lower, lower caste sort of chambers, but they did take on people of ethnic minorities. So I applied there, and I got in. and God
I
bless
mean,
them for taking me
I
in.
just can't believe what you're saying.
Yes, it's true. I know. It's true. It's true. And so I went back down to London. I'd been at bar school in London. I'd got a scholarship from the inn. Had been very, very supportive, my inn. And there were a number of scholarships out there at the time because industries and the professions were trying to encourage people of colour. So I managed to avail myself of that, be in the right place at the right time. And I did my pupillage down there.
I knew this was
But
going to be a
then,
great chat. I knew this was going to be a brilliant chat. This is absolutely. I forget sometimes that I'm actually supposed to be interviewing you because it's just so interesting and breathtaking.
oh, that's kind of you. I mean, it seems weird to sort of, I suppose this is my life. It seems weird to sort of lay it all out in this way. I don't do this very often. But then I applied back then to Leeds. I knew I wanted to practice in my own community. I wanted to practice in Leeds. And I did get tenancy, as it's called then, when you're taken on in the chambers in Leeds. And I think at that time, there were 2 other black barristers on what's called the North Eastern Circuit, which is a circuit that stretches from Sheffield up to Newcastle, nigh on 1,000 barristers, all doing crime, doing family, civil work, etc. And there were, fast forward nearly over 20 years to George Floyd, and there were about 6 of us. And you realise just how slow the progress was, and our circuit, as many institutions did, tweeted Black Lives Matter. And then I just thought, well, hang on a minute, what have we done? What have we actually done to promote people of colour at the bar? And I did raise this with those that administrate our circuit. And, they were saying, well, what do you want to do? What should we do? And I can only think of my own path, really. And now, just by those bits of luck, I made it. I could have easily fallen at a number of hurdles. So I on the back of a envelope, really, during lockdown, wrote down sort of 5 things I felt we needed to do as a profession. The first thing is, when you approach chambers and say, well, how come you've not got anybody of colour in your whole chambers? You've got 50 people here. And the standard response was, oh, well, people don't come to us, don't apply to us. How can we take them on? My answer to that was always simple. We've got to go to them.
Yeah.
We've got to do outreach work. We've got to go out into the community. We've got to go to schools, careers fairs. We've got to sort of parade the small amount of diversity we've got and tell our stories to encourage people to come.
Because the small amount of diversity we've got isn't 6 in 1,000.
No, yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah, we need to do that. We need financial assistance. So put together a scholarship for the circuit. So then we now have interviews with people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or people that meet our diversity criteria, caregivers, care leavers, people with neurological issues, mature students, things like that. And we now, to make sure they've got the funding, give money. So I sort of tax every barrister. 1,000 barristers is great if you can get 10 or 20 pounds off each one.
Yeah.
We usually raise about 15,000 a year, and I sit at the head of the scholarship. In a way, looking for people like me. Now I can use it to my advantage.
Do you start at Morrison's?
Yes. They're straight in the door. Any supermarket experience. So we have that. And the other thing I ask people to do is kind of invert the criteria. Previously, it was if you knew somebody in the profession, if you went to Russell Group or Oxford or Cambridge University, if you had reams of qualifications, then you were in. Doesn't mean to say, in my view, that would make you a good barrister. My view is, if you went to a inner city school and you actually got several GCSEs, and then you got some A levels, but you were from a social lower socioeconomic background, or your school was in special measures, you've done really well. You have done really, really well. If you have studied part-time while bringing up a child or looking after a relative, you are dedicated. You must be really dedicated to this job. And if you've worked in a law centre or a citizen advice bureau, I'd take that over somebody who, no disrespect, has gone up Kilimanjaro, or those were all the value systems, in my view, in selection, were completely upside down. And we've asked all chambers to look at it now a different way, from a different the opposite end of the telescope.
Is that across the board as well, not just for people from an ethnic minority? Is that for everybody? Do you think it would work?
For everybody, yeah. To sort of bring everybody on board and bring everybody with us. I realised you couldn't just sell this on a basis of colour or even gender, just as on a basis, anyway, to promote this on the basis of chance. Everybody has the same chance, and on an actual fact, at the root of it all, you realise, when you dig deep, is actual socioeconomics. Because right at the very bottom of, in the what used to be called sink schools, you will find a good mix. I think it will make a big difference across the board.
It makes you wonder as well if people from that background, rather than the more traditional sort of middle and upper class background that go into that profession, have they got more fight in them? Have they got more reason to actually represent people from the same background that they find themselves having come from? It makes you wonder if that there is a spark to them that perhaps doesn't exist, or doesn't exist in the same way in the historic sort of ways of finding people.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, there were times when going to the bar was sort of a badge. People would go to the bar and then become MPs, or go to the bar and then go into industry and become directors. It was a good badge to have, but they were not necessarily in it wholly for the profession itself, which is to fight for people. Or to fight for justice on either side of the spectrum, whether you're prosecuting or defending. But people who have sacrificed everything and have worked and fought to get there, those people are there for the long haul, if we can get them over the line.
And how many people have you since that back of the envelope 5 points that you wrote down? Do you know how many people have come through this system that are now, where, because you must be getting towards the end of that process now for the very first people?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm delighted to say that there are 3 who have been recipients of scholarships.
That's amazing.
And as I say, the whole idea is to catch those people who, but for some financial assistance, we might lose, because they've got all the promise, meet all the criteria, but just can't afford it. So it's really focusing on those people. So we've got 3 people, 2 of which are now tenants, and 1 who is coming through. And of course, then that breeds the sort of success, because now we can show and say, look, now your money helped these people, so it's working. We're getting the results. And the general framework, which I spoke about earlier, about trying to get all the chambers on our circuit to sign up to what became known as a common framework. It wasn't my idea. It was something that was put together by the Bar Council, but I did ask all circuits to sign up to this, which was, again, to look at people's commitments and people's achievements in a different way, not against what we regard as them achieving, because I'll say, well, they've not got a first like I have, but to look at it in the context of their own lives.
Yeah.
And what they've achieved in the context of their own lives. And I think that is also making a difference. And slowly but surely, and it is slowly, we are seeing a change. Now, the real test, because of course this has happened before, we've seen these little green shoots and then they're left to wither, is whether we now promote this for the long term, because the figures, even though we're now 5 years in across the profession, show some change, but very, very slow change. Still very few women as judges, but more. people from black ethnic backgrounds. I think there's one or two black judges.
The whole system is quite glacial in the speed that it works, though, isn't it?
That's it.
So
That's the word.
there's no quick results. You have to invest for the long term, really, don't you, in order for it
Yes,
to work?
yes, and that's what we're doing. But time will tell, and it is very, very slow going, Mark. But we've just got to keep it moving.
With a bit of luck, that the three people that have come through the system that you've been involved with, hopefully they will become advocates for it. Then they might
Yeah,
bring 3 on each. That's 9. It soon adds up, doesn't it?
that's it. We are all now going in the same direction, and I do sort of sense that I was saying if I'm going to helm this, I don't want to do it if it's a flash in the pan. I
No.
want us the committed and the circuit to be committed to seeing this through long after all the sort of initial hoopla and fanfare when it was rolled out. But when it's
You don't want it to
people are
be
saying,
another Lawrence corridor.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, want
Yeah.
it to be something for the long term, and time will tell in relation to that, Mark.
On the subject of time, time is moving on, and I'd like to talk to you about the reason that really you and I first met, if that's possible. That your involvement with the sort of Caribbean military coming over and helping us out. If you could go through that, and I'm sure you're well versed in it, and you could tell the stuff better than I can.
Well, yeah, it was when it all sort of links up this whole story really now through this, because I traced my family. My father at the time was still alive, and told me stories that his older brothers had come to this country in the Second World War and was stationed in Filey. When I then went on to meet my dad's older brothers, who lived down in Gloucester, they said, "Oh yeah, we came over in the Second World War, and we joined the RAF, and we were stationed at a place called RAF Hummunby Moor in Filey." And I thought, well, Filey's not too far from where I am in Leeds. I've been to Filey. I've never seen anything about that. And it's something that stuck with me. And then we all had our lockdown projects, and that was another one of mine, to try and properly see if I could research any of this. And weirdly enough, although there was very, very little, scoured the internet, couldn't really find anything. I did find one article about a cricket match that had taken place at Reeton Chapel between the Caribbean servicemen and the locals. And then they'd all gone to the vicarage for tea. And would you believe, Mark, that my uncle's name was there?
Wow.
Gilmore Westcar was there as one of the ones. I couldn't believe it. So I got in touch with the website. I found this on the founder of the website. It was called Africans in Yorkshire. And she said, "Oh yes, it's just a little known story. We've not been able to research this any further." So then we started researching it together, and we found that in the early 40s, incredibly, 6,000 men from the Caribbean came over to the United Kingdom. That, and again, it's important to know the history and the historical context of this. Although Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, by 1940, Hitler was kind of swayed right across the Europe. France had fallen in June 1940. The Americans didn't come into the war until Pearl Harbor, which was December 1941. So there was that terrible period.
British will have been on their knees at that point, I would imagine.
Absolutely on the knees. And of course, then there was the Blitz, which started in September 1940 and went through to March 1941. Heavy bombing of industrial towns and cities across the length of this country, and led to the evacuation of children. So absolutely, Mark, absolutely on its knees, desperately short of manpower and of ordnance, of tanks. So it looked to the colonies, and remembering that they were all, although British subjects, volunteers. They were not conscripts. There was no obligation to join. but the men from the ministry travelled out there and signed up young people.
Have you been told how that happened? Have you been told by your uncles what they remember of that process?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that people came there, and there'd be meetings at town halls and at local areas where you would go. You get a flyer coming through, and of course, at those times, say Jamaica, which is where I'm from, and I suspect it's same in the other Caribbean islands. Long before mass tourism, there were farmers, really farming, very little sort of an industry. So young people would go, and no doubt looking for adventure. Many would lie about their ages and be signed up and came over here. And of the
Do you think it was
6,000,
glamorized to them?
yes, I think it was. Certainly, from what my uncle was told and from what I've researched, they were being told a number of things. Very few of which actually came to pass, but they said you'll be trained up as pilots. If we do win, you'll be allowed to stay. If we do win, you will be heroes and you will be recognized. There'll be training courses for you, and you'll come back. If you decide to come back to this country or live in England, you will have proper training and qualifications. And we will all be very, very grateful. Now, fast forward into the end of the war, very little of that actually came to pass. But it's important to remember that they did get a fantastic welcome. What became RAF Hummonby Moor was at the time a half-built Butlins holiday camp. And if you stand on Filey seafront and look to your right, you can see the remnants of it.
I live in Scarborough, and I don't know where it is, so I'm going to have to go and look.
Go and have a look. It's now Primrose Valley Holiday Park. So it was half built at the time, and was commandeered from Sir Billy Butlins himself, and he got a sweet deal. They said, well, we'll finish it off and compensate you if we win the war. The chalets were turned into Nissen huts, and the lake was filled in and became a parade ground. And 4,000 passed through there. And you can imagine, I suppose, what impact that must have had.
Yeah.
Filey, from what I could see from the sort of censuses around the time, was a town of, 2,500, 3,000 souls. No doubt many of them, if not all of them, were seeing and meeting a black person for the first time. But they got a fantastic welcome. And one of the stories that my uncle told me, he said, we had no trouble whatsoever. People were so kind to us. The only people we did not want to bump into was the Americans, and in particular the American MPs, military police, because America had segregated regiments, even in this country. And although they were not stationed at Filey, they were stationed in other places, in Lincolnshire and places like that, they did come to like Scarborough. And he told me a story, my uncle Gil, of going into a pub in Scarborough, and the Americans coming in and saying, "Oh, but we don't drink with those sort. We want them out. I'm not bringing any of my men in here." And he says that to a person in the pub, they all said, "Well, no, you can go. These have come over to help us."
Wow.
And
that must have felt fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. So there were no.
That actually has made me well up.
Yeah, that does make me emotional, actually. And as I said, the cricket match that I referred to earlier, there's photographs of that now online, and there was a sense of coming together, of harmony, of sort of multiculturalism in Filey, decades before that phrase was even coined.
And interestingly, even though Filey and Hummonby and those places are sort of pretty remote and tiny, they're only 40 miles away from Hull. I grew up in Hull, and I knew a lady at the end of my street who was evacuated to Scarborough when she was a child during the war. And she said that, and this makes me well up as well, always, she said that they could see the fires of the bombings in Hull from Scarborough.
Yeah.
And so they were in the thick of it, even though they were in the sticks. You on the East Coast, you were in the thick of it, weren't you?
Absolutely, you were, and in it together. And this is why I've always felt this is just a fantastic story of togetherness in adversity. And I just feel, it's a probably totally naive, and people would say pie in the sky feeling, but it's one that I adhere to, that I just feel if we knew more about our shared histories, then there would be, my hope is there would be less racism. If we knew that our, people who would, campaign anti-immigration and would question what immigrants have done for this country, as they would put it, if they knew of our shared history about their forebears had fought together, and this is a story not just from the Second World War, but from the First World War as well, in the trenches, there were black regiments then. If it was more widely known how closely we'd fought together, that maybe there wouldn't be this division at times.
And you've tried to do something about that?
Yes, I have. I tried to firstly get this story out and promote it over the BBC, Look North, over local radio, my Facebook page, but also tried to get a permanent memorial and a plaque. And I approached Filey Town Council with this. He said, did you know you had this fabulous story, this wonderful piece of, a very important piece of social history on your doorstep? Most of them didn't know about it. Some did. And I said, well, I would like to have some sort of memorial. These are the Filey Memorial Gardens in the middle of Filey. It's a very nice, pleasant area. It's got Memorial Arch. Could there not be a plaque in there and a information board? And I said, on behalf of myself and the barrister of the North Eastern Circuit, we'll pay for it. So I'm putting to your proposal, which would enhance the town and its history, important part of the history. And
celebrate its very early multiculturalism before the word even existed.
Absolutely. An important place it played in the history of the RAF and the Second World War. You won't even have to pay for it. We put a whole proposal together. I addressed them and they said no. I said, we don't want it. And I was flabbergasted, Mark, totally flabbergasted, and asked for reasons why. At first, they wouldn't give us any. But then, of course, when we took it to the media and the media was asking them why, I suppose they felt they had to give a reason. And their initial reason was that they were saying, well, if we have a plaque to Caribbean people, then we'd have to have a plaque to Polish people and to the American people. And I said, well, why not?
Yeah,
why not tell the story in the Memorial Gardens? Absolutely. And we managed to point out that there's a church on the outskirts of Filey, which does have a plaque to the Polish service people. And it's all part of their rich history. Then they said, changing tack, the official line was the Filey Memorial Gardens are only for people who were born in Filey, and only for people who died in Filey. And I said, well,
just not for people who risked their life for Filey.
Exactly. And in fact, some of the Caribbean contingent did die. There's the war graves in Harrogate, which records 3 Jamaican Caribbean volunteers who died because you won't be surprised to hear that the conditions were pretty grim for people from the Caribbean to be put on the east coast of England in winter. TB and other infections run rife.
Wow.
And at least 3 died very early on and were buried here. And we never know whether their family ever knew what had happened to them. So people did die there, but it's more that they fought shoulder to shoulder. That's the message I've tried to get out. These were a joint endeavour. We're hoping that we're trying to get people interested in this to take it forward and make a documentary. Sadly, the numbers of original volunteers are dwindling. So what we did was we raised the money anyway, had the plaque made, and literally took it to the council and said, look, here it is. Where are you going to put it? They said, well, I'm afraid no, we've got no plans for it. Only place we could suggest you could put it would be on the Primrose Valley holiday camp, which anybody knows that is on an A road, a major A road, and no footfall, and it's private property. So they had it wasn't in their gift. But again, there's bits of good fortune in the darkest hours being before dawn when I thought we've got nowhere to go with this campaign. Somebody from Filey said, actually, I've got a property in Filey, you can put it on there. It was a wonderful moment because I thought, I don't know where we're going to go with this now. We seem to have exhausted all possible avenues. 85 Queen Street is where it is. The house itself is of no historical connection, but it's right on the street. the terraced houses. So now the plaque is resplendent. We unveiled it on April the 1st, 2023, which was the 105th birthday of the RAF. And we managed at that time to track down 6 veterans of Filey, all of them at that time, late 90s. The oldest was 101. So if you can imagine, Mark, there was somebody there who was only 4 years younger than the RAF itself.
Gosh.
Isn't that amazing? And we managed to get them there. It was a fabulous endeavour of people's goodwill and everybody pushing in the same direction. We got donations of Caribbean food. We found that there was a veteran in Solihull who had just been awarded his medals, and coming back to what I said to you before, how many promises were kept and not kept, but a lot of them didn't have their medals. They were sent back as soon as the war was over. Although they were British citizens and legally could stay in this country, the government got round that quite niftily by saying you can only be demobbed in the country that you started from, which forced people to go back to their countries, and a lot of them didn't get their medals. But we got a message that there was a chap in Solihull who'd just been 80 years he'd waited to get his medals, and it was a very difficult for him, but he got them. So this was on the Wednesday, and I managed to get on social media, and to cut a long story short, we managed to arrange to get him and his wife to Filey. Myself and my wife, we booked out all the hotel rooms we could find in Filey. They couldn't travel during the day because some of them were so old and frail, but they were determined to be there. And we put people up. We had a fabulous unveiling. You can see the unveiling. There was a delegation from the Jamaican embassy came across. The mayor of Filey came across. She looked rather shamefaced, especially when people kept on asking, why can't this be in the memorial gardens? So we have it there. The plaque is there. And on every Remembrance Sunday, we gather at the plaque. So we're now in the absurd position of having kind of a remembrance apartheid on the streets of Filey. I've said to the council, until we have some recognition in the memorial gardens that these men fought and died alongside others of this country, then we're going to hold our remembrance services at the plaque and not here.
Yeah.
So we do that, and every year we've got friends and relatives of the servicemen who come and gather. And I think you came. We sound the last post, and we sometimes have some Caribbean food. We celebrated last June the 80 years since the first Caribbean soldiers came en masse, although many had been signing up since the outbreak of war, but the sort of mass immigration from the Caribbean started in 43, 44.
As a layperson looking in, having had very little to do with it, and it may be wrong of me to do this, but I can see no other reason why it isn't permitted other than the lame excuses you've been provided, which is not race related. I can see no other reason.
Well, that's what it boils down to, and that's I believe the position that Filey Council has backed itself into. Of course, it is a democratically run council, so we have had some councillors who've been in touch with us and offered us support. And I know at least of one that resigned as a result of the frustration she felt, the lack of motivation to change this. It's nothing but a positive story, and when you can consider,
good people protecting what became a pivotal change in life for every British citizen then and moving forward. It's just
absolutely,
it beggars belief.
It does, and if anybody who's listening to the podcast wants to express their views, we always encourage polite emails to Filey Town Council.
Absolutely,
through their email address, and just ask them why it is.
So I just sort of moving on a little bit. You're clearly a very intelligent man, and you are clearly a very fair person. You come across as a very fair person, but with with an aim to make things much more fair. And I don't think you want more than fairness when it comes to
Mm,
people of
mm.
colour. Or I would imagine it doesn't stop with colour for you. Actually, I would imagine it's
No,
anybody from a disenfranchised
well,
background, really. Um,
that's it.
how do you feel? I'll tell you what I think. I think that things were only ever going to change if people are willing to communicate. I think communication is everything, and I think, and I've said this in previous episodes, that in order to make things happen, I think we have to behave. One, be prepared to come to the table and just talk, but two, I think we all have to be prepared not to cause offence, but equally to try not to take offence. In order for these difficult subjects to be discussed in a productive manner on a micro and macro level, how do you think the issue of race is now and will move forward if we are actually going to move it forward?
Well, I think the heart of everything that I've managed to achieve is education, really. When I was at school, the only um, one of two O levels that I did get was history, and I was
Mm,
fascinated by the cause of the First and Second World War. There was no mention at all of anybody of any colour, never mind from the Caribbean or the
mm,
Sikhs and Gurkha regiments, anybody from the Asian subcontinent making any contribution at all
mm,
to the First or Second World War. The line, which I always think is a artificial line in history for black people, is Windrush. And I
yeah,
often say this when I do talks. I do go around schools and I talk to historical societies about filing. I've got a problem with what is now seems to be the hard line of what I refer to as a Windrush narrative, that black people were only in this country from 1957, 58, and helped rebuild the country, but didn't take any part in the war,
we only
which
have
is
to live in a
totally,
port in
yeah,
Liverpool or Manchester to know that that's, in a Hull, sorry, to know that
yeah,
that's absolutely not true.
yeah, absolutely right, Mark. I mean, there's censuses show that we're very well established black communities in places like, as you say, the port towns, Cardiff, probably the oldest are in Cardiff and Liverpool,
Mm, Bristol.
and in Bristol. Hull had a quite thriving at one stage black community,
Mm,
which was recorded in the 1896 census.
there you go.
So very very. So these two sort of hard lines of history that we've been taught all these years, that there were no black people in this country before Windrush, and black people's contributions it was only after the war. We've got to really start tackle those and get them into schools. I mean, my own children were flabbergasted when I showed them photographs of black people in uniform, and they say to me, "Well, didn't know did black people fight in the war?" People have got no concept outside of American
Incredible.
films that black people from the Caribbean fought in the war in this country and abroad. So I think it's got to go back to the grassroots issue of education, and as you say, being able to talk about what unites us and also what makes us different, and to be able to celebrate both, and
Mm,
not to take offense by being asked about that, which very very difficult. The phrase woke is used as a positive and a negative nowadays, isn't it?
yeah.
You know,
I think it's
and
actually a really unhelpful phrase, to be honest. I think humane is probably the best way
yeah,
of talking about it.
yes, yeah, absolutely. It's been used by the sort of people on the right to sort of beat people. Say, "Oh, he's just being woke," and I
Yeah,
do think that perhaps that's what dogged the campaign in its early days, because we went from the outpouring of upset and anger with George Floyd to then what became known as sort of the woke brigade, and then the uh, throwing of the statue,
yeah.
Edward Colston statue, and then things turned. Then the tide sort of turned slightly. I felt um, against anybody who wanted to promote the issues. It was all that's woke, next thing they'll be throwing statues in the river, and the conversation kind of then got shut down
Yeah. I mean,
just as
I
it got.
think periods of financial difficulty often drive division, don't they? And
Yeah,
certainly that's where we're at now with this massive political divisions, and I think that then causes extremes on one side, extremes on the other, neither of which you or I would be probably comfortable with. But there is
Mm.
some still somewhere in the middle that needs to be addressed in order for those extremes to be dealt with by both sides to say that's just not on. Stop it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that progressing it on the basis of social economics and everybody's right to a chance,
Mm,
I think brings everybody to the table
I
because
agree,
everybody
and that's
understands.
exactly what you're doing with
Yeah,
your training.
yeah, that's the way forward, and everybody's interested. It's not just a black agenda, not just a male agenda. It's for anybody who feels disenfranchised but wants to have their opportunities platform.
Interestingly, I have an excellent book by June Sarpong, um,
Ah,
and it's basically about bringing people together, recognizing that actually the middle class white man may have been the problem, but
mm,
also in order
yeah,
for that to change, we have to come together and talk about it. And the middle class white man who is vilified has to also be in the conversation in order to make the change. So it's a brilliant book. It's only less short, but it's very good. June Sarpong's very, very good.
yeah, she is. Yeah, very, very good, and it is important because, of course, I've had a little bit of pushback in that direction because, of course, people are saying, well, we're in battle if we are now a middle class white person or a successful barrister who's been to public school. They're saying, well, we're in battle now. We can't apply for any jobs. We won't get any
Mm.
of these jobs now because it's all for females and people from ethnic minorities. And I don't subscribe to that. I think I can
No,
understand
I
why they
don't.
feel that. I don't subscribe to that at all. I say, you don't know what privileges you've got here.
But I also
You
think
want,
it shouldn't be. It doesn't really matter. It should be on merit. So if you're not
yes,
getting the jobs, you're not trying hard enough.
yeah, absolutely, and there should be, and the statistics don't bear that out anyway. Otherwise, we would
Absolutely
have.
not.
I wouldn't be need to even have this conversation. It would have all changed. But
Mm,
there is a sense that we've got to bring everybody along, really, to maintain it and
I
hopefully
agree.
at some stage to accelerate it. But if we leave anybody out, we've got a roadblock waiting for us further on down the line, I think. So we've got to
Absolutely.
sort of bring everybody along with us.
Well, I think we've put the world to rights there, Glenn.
Well, I've enjoyed that. I have enjoyed that. The only thing, as I say, would have made that better is we'd have had a pie here each between us.
Hey,
We'll
well,
have to
I
do
tell you
that
what.
next time.
Next time I come and see our mutual friend, let's perhaps try and arrange that so that we can, because
Yes,
he has a very lovely pub round the corner from him, which does very lovely pies. I've had one there, so we shall try and arrange
brilliant. Well,
that.
we'll do that. Let me know when you're next in town, and we'll definitely do that.
I certainly will. And can I just say thank you very much? Thank you very much for agreeing to do this when you don't know me very well, and I hope I filled you with confidence that I wasn't here to hoodwink you in any way. But I think what you do is marvelous. I think you are an excellent example to anybody who has encountered difficulties and seen that actually that you saw there was a chance for change and you took it. I um I also think that I'd like to thank you specifically because it's very difficult to find people who are comfortable talking on this subject in this manner, um, and I think you've done it in a very healthy and positive way. Certainly, that's assisted me in being able to not say the wrong things, and because there's a big fear involved in that as well. I think people fear
Mm,
saying the wrong things,
mm.
and um, I think you're a safe pair of hands from that point of view. So thank you for taking the time out of your very important day to do this.
No, it's very kind of you indeed, and I'm very grateful for those kind words and for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it. Time's flown by.
Great. Well, let's try and find something else to do. Another one on another day.
Yes, yeah. Well, I have to update you in hopefully not too long with the progress of our campaign and with the scholarships, and hopefully we'll have some good news to talk about.
Well, on here I'll try and put some of the web addresses. I know I've got your web address for the scholarship. I've got I've got your Facebook stuff, so I'll try and put some links on to make sure that anybody who does, any of the two people that watch this video, if they are interested in in taking part in any of the things you do, then they can at least find it.
Yeah, great, brilliant.
Brilliant.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you very
Glenn.
much.
Thank you ever so much. I'm going to stay on and just do some bits that we said to record that to try and save time. So I hope you have a great day.
And you, thanks very much, then, Mark.
Thanks,
Speak
Glenn.
soon.
Look after yourself.
Best
Bye
wishes.
bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye
Bye.
bye. So, everybody, that was Glenn Parsons. What a brilliant conversation. I don't know Glenn very well. I have met him, as we've discussed, and we have a mutual friend. And I just knew the day I met Glenn that he was somebody I needed to get on this podcast. Okay, thanks ever so much to Glenn Parsons for joining us today. Thoroughly interesting chat. I hope you've enjoyed the today's podcast. If you prefer to listen on the go, please subscribe to your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. And you can subscribe to Chewing the Crust there. So thanks ever so much for joining us this week, and we'll see you again. Thanks. Bye. I think that's a wrap.